Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Apologies for being late. It was completely my fault, and I'm very glad to be here. I feel really honored to have the opportunity to share some thoughts with you. Actually, on a historical episode on money, which I've thought might be of great interest for you. Let us begin with a brief introduction that actually sets the theoretical framework for my lecture, The Banco, Lessons from a Free Market in Money episode, 1619 until 1873. So we're talking about a period that's long ago. We will start, or I will start, with a brief look at the idea put forward by the Austrian economist Friedrich August von Hayek in his book Denationalization of Money, published in 1976. And as some of you might know, Hayek advocated for the privatization of money production, a demand that was astonishing to many then and still is today, I suppose, because for most people it was and is considered natural or normal that the state holds the monopoly on money production, meaning that money production is effectively nationalized. Let us ask, why did Hayek call for the privatization of money? The answer: Hayek believed that the state, as we know it today, would abuse its authority over money, that it would inflate or devalue the purchasing power of money for its own benefit and to the great damage of the general population. Hayek's view was and is well-founded. The history of state-controlled money is undoubtedly a rather painful one. Whenever possible, the state has devalued money for its own purposes, and this is especially true in modern times, when money is no longer backed by or can no longer redeemed into anything at the state's issuing authority. One need only to look at the currency history of the 20th century. There have been repeated episodes of severe hyperinflations, so periods where prices really accelerated as far as their increases were concerned. And just think of the 1920s, for instance, in Austria, or very prominent Hungary, or even more prominent, the German Reich, when there was a hyperinflation in 1923, or more recent hyperinflations in Brazil, in Argentina, in Turkey, and Zimbabwe. How does Hayek envision the privatization of money? Well, if you read the book, quite simply, Hayek relies on freedom of choice in money. Everyone, you and I, should have the freedom to demand the money that best suits our purposes. And everyone should be free, have the freedom to offer a good to his fellow people that they voluntarily demand as money. In this sense, according to Hayek, it is ultimately the money, the people, actually those who demand money, that decide what money is. Can it work? Well, from a theoretical perspective, I have to admit I'm in the camp that would think, yes, no doubt, a free market in money, as Hayek envisioned, can function smoothly and lead to not only economically but also ethically sound and acceptable outcomes. As noted earlier, ultimately the demand for money is the people who choose their money, who determine what money is. And they will demand good money, not bad money, just as people demand good cars and good books and good vacations and good sports shoes and not bad ones. Hayek's theoretical idea of a free market in money is by no means a fiction, I may say. Looking at currency history, there are many examples of money being chosen in a free market, not imposed from above by the state, and such money was accepted as good money for a long time and remained stable. One example is the florin. It was a gold coin minted in Florence, in Italy, from 1252 until 1533. Officially called Fiorino de Oro, it weighed 3.54 grams and was made of pure gold and had a diameter of round about 20 millimeters. Modeled after Byzantine coins, it featured a lily, the symbol of Florence, on the one side, and John the Baptist, the city's patron saint, on the other. Thanks to Florence's economic influence, the florin became Europe's most important trading coin in the 13th and 14th century, comparable to the status of the US dollar in today's economic and financial system. The florin was widely used in trade, banking, international business, particularly in Italy, in France, in Germany, and England. Many cities and countries minted their own variants, such as the Rhenish florin or the Hungarian forint, often with varying gold content. Over time, however, the florin lost its significance for various reasons. By the 16th century, it was largely replaced by other gold coins, such as the ducat and the silver coins. Its name, however, lived on in the Dutch, for instance, in the Dutch gulden or the Hungarian currency, the former florint. And perhaps an even more striking example of money chosen in a free market, and one used within a highly developed banking and payment system, is the mark Banco. The mark Banco served as money for nearly 250 years, so the florin actually had a lifespan of close to 300 years, and we're talking now about a currency that served as money for roughly 250 years, namely from 1619 to 1873 in the Holy Roman Empire of German nations and beyond, proving to be an exceptionally reliable currency. First, a few remarks on the origin of the mark Banco. At the beginning of the 17th century, Europe experienced significant coin debasement. This was the time of the whippers and clippers, which peaked in 1620 and 1622 roughly during the 30 Years' War, which raged from 1618 to 1648. Whipping referred to identifying heavier silver coins on a quick scale. The subsequent clipping of good coins meant that lighter, so inferior coins, were made for heavier and good coins. As there was a temptation, as you see, for people to reduce the metal content of coins while keeping the coins imprinted or nominal value unchanged. In the Holy Roman Empire of German nations, following the so-called Augsburg Imperial Coinage Ordinance from 1559, the so-called Silver Reichstaler, so the empire coin, that I think is a good translation, was a standard currency coin with a gross weight of 29.23 grams of silver. However, local rulers were allowed to mint their own coins, valid only in their territories. So the little fiefdoms actually had the authority to produce their own silver coins with a lower alloy. These were token coins, and that means the nominal value was higher than the real metal value, as opposed to full value coins whose metal value at least matched their nominal value. The debasement primarily affected smaller denominations of coins which were significantly multiplied. So they melted down the high value coins, the heavy coins, into lighter coins. So with a given amount of silver weight, they produced more coins. And as you know, today we would call it inflation, increasing the stock of money in the economy. This immediately triggered Gresham's law, which states that money that has been overvalued by the state drives out money that has been undervalued by the state. In practice, this meant that people exchanged inferior coins for heavier and better coins. Good coins were either hoarded or melted down to produce, as I said, more coins with a lower metal content. Thus, coins with less metal content circulated as a means of exchange, while the heavier and better coins were hoarded. And I would like to give you, well, you see a picture of the 30 Years' War, and maybe this chart again stresses the problem the monetary system suffered from in the 17th century, the kind of a coin clipping, physical removal of small amounts of official gold and silver coinage to melt down for profit. Of course, it was a profitable business back then. The problem, it led to a debasement of coins' purchasing power, that is, to monetary or goods price inflation. And the solution was the introduction of new minting technologies, ensuring that new coins couldn't be clipped and were harder to counterfeit. That came a bit later. But I think it's of interest for us just to look briefly at what Gresham's law actually says, and I produced an example for you. Suppose the free market exchange ratio between gold and silver is 1 to 16, meaning 1 ounce of gold exchanges for 16 ounces of silver in the free marketplace. Now the state mint, we assume, sets an exchange ratio of 1 to 15.5. At this rate, silver is overvalued compared to gold, and gold is, of course, undervalued compared to silver. What happens? Well, market participants exchange 15.5 fine ounces of silver at the mint for getting one fine ounce of gold. With that 1 fine ounce of gold, they receive 16 fine ounces of silver in the free market. So they take the 16 fine ounces to the mint and receive 1.03 to 2.8 fine ounces of gold. They exchange this amount of gold for silver, again in the free market, and receive 16.51613, as you see, I calculated that for you, fine ounces of silver, and so on. The result, silver that was overvalued by the state mint is used as money. It circulates. While gold that has been undervalued by the state disappears from circulation and is hoarded. This example illustrates that money overvalued by the state, in this case silver, drives out money that has been undervalued by the state. And that is what Gresham's law tells us. It's not like good money drives out bad money. The key issue is the fixed exchange rates between the two money types under review. That said, whipping and clipping led to a devaluation of the coin's purchasing power, causing an expansion of the money supply. More and more coins were with unchanged nominal value were minted, and this in turn led to a rise in goods prices. As you know, monetary theory has, I think, a very good insight in what money does. If we increase the money stock in the economy, and if we assume that the demand for money is fairly stable, goods prices go up. The chronic currency devaluation increasingly became a problem for the population. Of course, for them, goods prices rose, they could buy less with their currencies. And also for national and international trade. As you know, inflationary money complicates or even distorts economic calculation that is done with money. The Dutch responded to this problem by founding the Amsterdam Wissel Bank in 1609, the first publicly owned bank to offer customers precious metals accounts and facilitate cashless settlements of claims and liabilities between customers. A bit later, the free city of Hamburg is in the northern part of Germany, and its merchants established the Hamburger Bank, and that was in 1619. The city of Hamburg assumed liability for potential bank losses due to theft or fire, and of course gave it a kind of reputation. The so-called Banco mandate from February 1619 instructed the Hamburg Bank to accept precious metals, credit their value to customers' account, and disperse them upon a request. Like the Amsterdam Wissel Bank, the Hamburg Bank was a deposit bank. It began operation on March 20, 1619. Another mandate came on November the 20th, and it established the so-called Banco. That was meant to allow the Hamburg Bank to engage in loan activities, but we are not talking about this field of business. The major innovation was that the Hamburg Bank created its own unit of account, the Banco. When customers deposited a full value silver Reichstaler, that was the common coin standard back then, they were credited with 3 Mark Banco. In 1622, 1 Mark Banco corresponded to a silver weight of 8.66 grams. The Mark Banco was not minted, but was available solely as book or deposit money, used exclusively for cashless transactions. And that was because the merchants of the city of Hamburg rejected banknotes as being unreliable. The Hamburg Commerce Deputation, that was a precursor of the modern Chamber of Commerce, regularly issued price lists quoting commodity prices, exchange rates against other currencies, and insurance premiums in Mark Banco. And this is quite significant, as it shows that the Mark Banco was actually used for pricing goods, fully fulfilling the functions of money. The Mark Banco proved to be solid and reliable during the turmoil of the 17th century, when we had these whipping and clipping problems. However, after the 7 Years' War, and that was 1756 to 1763, a problem became increasingly evident. The coin standard of the Reichstaler, which was actually the backing of the Mark Banco, had progressively deteriorated, while the Mark Banco was still defined in terms of the old full value silver Reichstaler, but that was still minted in Hamburg. So customers withdrew heavier silver thalers and deposited debased coins, and that naturally undermined the value of the Mark Banco. It's quite interesting that an architect, namely Ernst Georg Sonnen, he was the builder of Hamburg's largest cathedral, proposed a brilliant idea. And according to some sources, and I try to give you a translation, he said the following, quote, my, how clever the Chinese are. And that must have been around 1760 or so. My, how clever the Chinese are. They care not for coin imprints, but take all silver by weight and purity. If only we did the same, we wouldn't have to rack our brains, but could calculate most simply and safely. Quote ends. Well, Sonnen advocated detaching the Mark Banco's value from the nominal value of coins and defining it henceforth by the weight of unminted silver. In 1770, this proposal was implemented through a bank reform. The silver thaler stored at the Hamburg Bank were melted into bars. And you can see this is a Reichsthaler, front and back side. It looked like this. You know, it was a silver coin with a weight of 22.272 grams. And the idea was to melt it down into bars, not imprinted with any number, pure weight silver bars. And the pure weight silver bars were then used as the backing of the Mark Banco. The German economist Ernst Levi von Halle, he lived from 1868 to 1909, wrote, quote, "By basing it on fine silver, the bank gained a worldwide reputation for ordinary and unwavering reliability towards the end of the last century, and its currency was, particularly from 1797 until 1819 or 1821, the period of English bank restriction, when the Bank of England suspended note redemption into gold, the measure and standard of all currencies, exchange rates, and precious metal prices." Quote ends. So we are not talking about a little coin that's used in some small place, but it has, the Mark Banco actually was a world type of currency. Let us briefly consider how banking with the Mark Banco actually worked. Just a very simple illustration, but I hope it's informative for you. Suppose an individual, say Mr. Smith, deposits silver bars worth 100 at the issue of the Mark Banco. Okay, we have a balance sheet. This is the asset side, this is the liability side, and we have a private, and he owns $100 grams or what, 100 grams of silver, and now he decides to exchange that into Mark Banco. What happens is an asset swap, so the silver position declines, the amount of Mark Banco increases, and in the balance sheet of the Hamburger Bank shows the amount of silver on the asset side and credits Mr. Smith a Mark Banco deposit of 100. Very simple. Now Mr. Smith can trade the Mark Banco against goods and services. Let's assume he buys some apples from a trader. What happens again? An asset swap in the balance sheet of Mr. Smith's balance sheet occurs. The Mark Banco position declines and the number of, or the value of goods increases. And here we have the balance sheet of the trader. The trader has originally 100 goods, and that declines to 0 and goes into the balance sheet of Mr. Smith. In exchange, he receives a Mark Banco of 100, and the final book entry we have to look at is on the liability side of the Hamburg Bank. So the Mark Banco deposit of Mr. Smith declines by 100, and the trader gets hold of this 100 Mark Banco. Cashless payment system, please.
Would the trader then be able to deposit the Mark Banco in the bank in exchange for silver?
Yes.
Okay.
That was one feature, that you as a owner of Mark Banco had the right to redeem your Mark Banco at any time in the full amount into pure silver.
And was there a fixed rate or did it fluctuate?
It was, to my knowledge, had always been fixed.
Okay.
So in that sense, it was a pure stable coin, a real stable coin. And again, it's a very simple illustration, but this is basically how it worked. The Mark Banco was, in monetary theory terms, you may call it a money substitute or a money certificate, while the silver would be money proper. So the end of the Hamburg Bank, its Mark Banco came with a shift from silver to gold money, After the founding of the German Empire in January 1871, the goal was to create a unified currency area in the new empire. The Reich Coinage Act of December the 4th, 1871 established the gold content of the new common currency, and that was the mark, which was applied to all regional currencies through the Coinage Act of July 1873. And the mark was introduced throughout the empire, the German Empire, on January the 1st, 1876. In that period, silver money was demonetized, not only in the German Empire, but around the same time in many other countries. For example, the US Coinage Act of 1873 defined the US dollar solely in terms of physical fine gold, no longer in silver. And some people call that decision the crime of 1873. The Hamburg Bank ceased operations on December 1875. The Prussian bank acquired the Hamburg Bank's property to establish a Reichsbank, so the central bank's branch. And the Mark Banco balances were transferred to the Reichsbank branch, and the bank's customers could withdraw their balances in fine silver bars or continue holding them, now devalued or revalued, not devalued, revalued into gold. It should be noted that the near-goal politically induced demonetization of silver had far-reaching consequences, not only in Europe, but also in the United States of America. First and foremost, it caused the silver price to fall, and I show you a graph from 1833 until 1933, and you see the silver price in dollar. It was roughly close to $1.3 per silver ounce until 1873, and then the Americans devalued silver as money. They didn't, so silver coins could still be used, but there was no longer a minting of new silver coins. And again, also in Europe, there was a demonetization of silver, and the market price of silver declined quite substantially. So holders of silver coins still preserved their value, but those who had unminted silver suffered, of course, a price decline and therefore a loss. Yeah, so I think there's no doubt that the politically induced demonetization of silver back then had a massive impact. It reduced the purchasing power of those holding unminted silver, and the silver money supply could no longer be expanded. And it's hardly surprising that such a development led to stock and financial market panics. Back then, there's a big panic of 1873 in the United States of America, which also affected European financial markets, causing economic downturns, etc. Again, unminted silver lost its purchasing power during this period, while the purchasing power of minted silver remained intact. And coming back to the Mark Banco, we can see that this silver-backed accounting unit had served as reliable money for roughly 250 years. The experience gained with the Mark Banco, I think, is still highly relevant today, given the immense monetary problems we find ourselves in, not only in Europe, but the world over. For the Mark Banco could be revived. The Mark Banco could be revived, the concept of it. One would only need to establish an institute, call it the New Hamburg Bank or the Buckingham New Bank, that offers customers precious metal accounts denominated in a unit of accounts, say as AGG, AG for silver and the second G for grams, or simply Mark Banco. The Mark Banco would trade freely against, say, the US dollar, the euro, the Japanese yen, etc. The institute issuing the Mark Banco would have to have Mark Banco balances backed 100% by physical silver. That refers to your question. so no fractional reserve banking, so to speak. And it must be redeemable into physical silver at all times upon the wish of the holder of the Mark Banco. Customers could make transfers with their Mark Banco balances if their business partners also have precious metal accounts, either at the same bank or another. The physical metal would need to be moved occasionally, a task that can be easily handled by a clearinghouse or a correspondent bank. On this basis, a credit bank could also emerge, financed through the issuance of shares and bonds purchased by investors with their Mark Banco, thereby temporarily transferring precious metals to the credit bank, which can be made available to borrowers. And that is a concept the merchants of Hamburg had already in mind in the 17th century. This way, people would have a functioning crisis-resistant money and payment system to fall back on if they fear a decline in the purchasing power of, say, official currencies. And so I conclude with two lessons drawn from the theoretical and empirical considerations in this lecture. The first lesson, theoretically speaking, a free market in money, as suggested by Friedrich August von Hayek in his seminal book and supported by other thinkers, is possible. And there is also quite some empirical evidence that a free market in money yields sound money. Just think of the florin I presented to you at the beginning of my presentation, and even more impressive, I think, the Mark Banco silver weight-based accounting unit. And the second lesson I would suggest is that from an economic and ethical viewpoint, a free market in money is clearly superior to any government-run fiat money regime. So there is a very good reason, at least, to revisit the Mark Banco concept, which can easily be institutionalized on the basis of, say, gold, silver, crypto units like Bitcoin or other candidates, depending on what people wish to use as money. And before I thank you for your attention, I invite you to stay in touch. You find me on X, LinkedIn, Facebook, Telegram, YouTube, and SoundCloud. Doesn't cost you anything, no Mark Banco, no pounds. And if this topic piqued your interest and you're wondering what might happen to your money in the future and how best to invest it, I recommend reading Dr. Polleit's Boom and Bust Report, written for investors who really want to know what's coming. Yeah, covering important and relevant topics, such as one of the latest editions dealt with trapped in the central bank matrix. Some of you might know the movie Matrix, and it fits quite nicely with the underlying monetary problems we face. Anyway, all information can be found at www.boombustreport.com. And now I would like to say thank you very much for your attention.